Pat McFadden, given the fact that the threats to MPs are now routine, are you alarmed that a man was able to get onto the parliamentary estate and climb Big Ben without being stopped?
I don't know if he posed any danger. I think the person's now down. I understand he's been arrested. It's an important national building. Of course, we want to see it protected, but I think the police have done their job. The person's down and he's been arrested.
But there's any nervousness about threats to MPs? I mean...
Oh, in general?
Yeah,
yeah, of course. Look, in the years that I've been in Parliament, 2 MPs have been killed. One has been, fortunate to escape with his life. So I think it's something that we're all aware of. I don't want to put that straight at this latest incident, but in general, yeah, and, we have a very open democracy in this country where MPs walk around mostly without physical police protection in their constituencies. The advice surgery is still something that we do and we like doing, and we cherish that face-to-face content with constituents, as well as other similar things like coffee mornings that I do regularly. So it's really important that we keep that and that MPs are available to the public.
All right. This weekend, the Americans withdrew access to satellite imagery, certain kinds of information from the Ukrainians. Were they wrong to do so?
Well, it's their decision. It's not something that we've done. We support Ukraine. We continue to supply Ukraine with weapons, with intelligence support, with help on the cyber front, because we believe that they're engaged in a really important fight for their country's freedom and the capacity to decide their own future.
But you know that the Ukrainians will be saying, here we are, you say you support us, but actually you're sending us into days of war with our hands tied behind our back. It's weakened our defences. The United Nations called yesterday one of the deadliest days for civilians in the war. Would you acknowledge that the White House perhaps shares some responsibilities for the deaths of the last 24, 48 hours?
There's no doubt about the UK government's position. You saw the way that Prime Minister Keir Starmer greeted President Zelensky last weekend, the attendance at the Summit of European Leaders, his meeting with the King and so on. There's no doubt where the UK stands.
But I'm asking you about the Americans.
With regard to the United States...
They're meant to be our closest allies.
Yeah, and they are.
Should they be doing this?
Look, with regard to the United States, what they're trying to do is bring the war to an end. I think that aim is shared by everyone. What we want to secure is not just an end to the fighting, but a peace that lasts. And that has underlined every action the Prime Minister has taken in recent weeks, because it will do nothing to secure Ukraine's future if we have a temporary ceasefire which lasts only as long as President Putin wants it to, and to start up again. And that's what's happened in the past. We've had cessations that haven't lasted.
That is fully understood. But should the path to a lasting peace lie via, if you can put it this way, extra Ukrainian deaths? Because, as a negotiating tactic with the Ukrainians, the United States is withdrawing its support and therefore exposing Ukrainian civilians to more danger.
Well, that's not something we've done.
I know, but I'm asking you as an ally, what should we be saying to the Americans about this? Is this morally or tactically even correct?
Well, my colleague, the Defence Secretary John Healey, was in the United States speaking to them precisely about this in the last couple of days. And all the way through, what we say in public and what we say in private is the same, is that, yes, we share the American desire for the war to come to an end, but we also want to make sure it's done in a way that the peace lasts. That's why we've been talking about security guarantees and making sure that behind a ceasefire there is a backstop to make sure that that ceasefire doesn't just last as long as Putin wants, because that's what happened in the past, and that will not leave Ukraine in a secure position in the future.
There is a problem here, isn't there, that the United States, I know you'll tell me we are the close allies and so on, but they seem increasingly unreliable. The American president says that he finds Vladimir Putin easier to deal with than Volodymyr Zelensky. Well, first, does our Prime Minister endorse that judgment?
It's not the view we take of President Putin. I think our views are on the record on that.
Don't you think it's a bizarre thing to say?
Well, you know, what I've learned in recent weeks is that the best way to conduct interviews is not to see everything through the lens of what's just been said in the United States. What's important is what is done.
One might interpret that as the best way for British government ministers to conduct interviews is never to say anything that they think about Donald Trump.
No, look, I do these interviews pretty regularly, as you know, and in recent weeks, much of the pattern is what do you think of the latest comment on X that's just come out of the United States? We've taken a sensible decision, I think, not to conduct our diplomacy like that. We will continue to speak to the Americans, who are huge allies and friends. There's a lot of deep values that underline this relationship that keep it strong. So we'll keep doing that. But what's important here is what happens, to make a serious point. And what we want is a peace in Ukraine that lasts. And that means a peace that's secure.
Well, indeed.
And that's what we're driving for every day.
Indeed. And keeping the peace is, of course, one of the issues here. Prime Minister's offered peacekeeping forces, but every military leader says that our 75,000 strong army can't possibly do this by itself or even fulfill the share of the peacekeeping that the Ukrainians want. I spoke to the Latvian president, and he says that he thinks that what Latvians are doing, which is conscription, should be considered by other European countries in order to make sure that we have the forces. Is that something that we would consider?
We're not considering conscription, but of course we've announced a major increase in defence expenditure a couple of weeks ago. And we do have to recognise that the world has changed here. The phrase step up is used a lot in recent weeks, and Europe does have to step up in terms of its own defence. President Trump isn't actually the first president to say that, but he said it
Indeed.
more loudly
and
with more force than his predecessors. So I think we've got to recognise that moment. And there is another important point here. When the world is changing as fast as it is, it's important that we don't cling on to old assumptions. And I think the Prime Minister's played a tremendous role in recent weeks in responding to that situation and explaining it to the public. And that's why the decision on increasing defence expenditure was needed. And it may be why other decisions are needed in the future that respond to a new reality and that we don't find ourselves caught operating under the same assumptions as we used to in the past when the situation has changed.
Just a quick question about that new reality. Does it involve a bigger army?
Well, we've got a strategic defence review led by Lord Robertson.
I know, I'm not asking about direction of
so let that report, and it will set out quite a lot about how this extra investment in defence should be, what that should be spent on. One thing's for sure, you would not spend that money today on the same things as you would 10 years ago. The experience of 3 years of the war in Ukraine has shown just how fast the battlefield is changing in terms of cyber, in terms of drones, in terms of the use of intelligence. So I don't think we would spend the money this time the way that we would have done 10 or 20 years ago. But that's precisely why we commissioned Lord Robertson and his colleagues to do the review that they've been engaged in.
OK, let's talk about the money. Prime Minister told the Chancellor she's got to get us to defence spending of 2.5% of gross domestic product. Under the Chancellor's own rules, she can't borrow more. She's promised she won't raise taxes on working people. Is one way to square the circle simply to change the rules so that defence spending, or some of it, just doesn't count against current expenditure?
But it will always count in some way. There's quite a lot of this around. Let's just change
Speaking
the rules.
as a former Chief Secretary of the Treasury.
It will always count in some way. If you try to place it in some off-balance sheet thing and so on, you still have to borrow that money. You still have to account for it in some way. There is
So no fiddling about with the rules.
There's no cost-free way of doing this. It has to be paid for in some way. Now, there's a perfectly legitimate debate about how you pay for things. That's always true in politics. What there isn't is just a free way to do this.
OK, so there's no fiddling with the rules. Let's talk about how you pay. There are obviously cuts coming. How many civil servants do you expect and plan to lose by the end of this Parliament?
Well, I don't want to do it like that, and that's precisely why I'm not operating in the same way as
well, you've got to do it somehow. You're paying them. Where are you going to get the money from? Are there going to be fewer civil servants?
The last government announced these targets. I think Boris Johnson said he'd get rid of 90-odd thousand. The later Conservative government said 66,000. What happened after that? Hiring went up. What's really important here is the state has to reform. Now, some of this is about the number of central civil servants. What I'd like to see
so there could be a reduction in headcount?
There could be, but what I'd like to see is fewer civil servants working in central London, more working in the regions where the property is cheaper and where we can spread around the career opportunities in the civil service. I'd like to see more teachers in our schools. I'd like to see more police officers in our streets. I'd like to see more technology applied to some of the repetitive tasks that we have that can enhance some of the jobs that people are doing. There's a whole lot of change coming. There is change in the private sphere. The public sphere cannot be immune from it.
I do just want to ask a question, simple question again. Do you want to see fewer civil servants at the end of this parliamentary term or not?
I want to see the most productive civil service we have. I think that will mean fewer in some areas, but let me just make a serious point here, Trevor, because we are a centre-left government that believes in the power of public provision. That's why we fought the election on a promise to hire more teachers, to hire more police officers. We need the people in the NHS to get the waiting list down, and we have to allocate resources that make sure these things happen.
Let me just have one more bash at this. Me and you and the Chancellor's watching. What you said so far has not communicated to her that you are going to respond to her request to reduce the spend. So how is anything that you've told me going to reduce the cost of the civil service and help her meet her financial targets?
Look, I think we can reduce the cost of the government overhead with a smart application of technology, with the right incentives for the vast majority of civil servants who are doing a good job. Do you know when we asked the civil service, what is it you most want to see? They said better performance management.
All right.
That's what we want to do.
OK, Chancellor's not getting a penny out of you by the sound of it. Let's look at somebody else's money. One other area where you could find cuts is welfare reform. Will some of the money the Chancellor needs come out of disability benefits?
We do have a package of welfare changes coming. It'll come pretty soon. And this area of disability benefits is really important. Let me just set out for you and your viewers what is happening here. We have over 9 million people of working age in the country who are not working. Now, some of those are early retirees and so on. But about 30% of those are people on long-term sickness benefits, about 2.8 million people. The cost of this has gone up by about £20 billion in the past few years. Furthermore, the do-nothing trajectory, if you like, is for it to rise to over 4 million people by the end of the decade. That's not fair on the people involved, and it's not fair on the taxpayer. So yes, we do have to act on this to make sure that we give everyone in the country the opportunity to work. We are the Labour Party. The clue is in the name. We cannot be relaxed about every year hundreds of thousands more people going on these benefits. And the UK is an outlier here. The UK is an outlier. We're the only country in the G7 not to recover the pre-pandemic ratio of employment. So we've got to act here.
I hear the message, work is good for you, but still haven't quite answered my question. Does this mean that the welfare bill is going to be cut, and in particular, the amount of money that we spend on disability benefits?
Well, wait to see our proposals, but there will be changes in long-term disability benefits because we cannot sit back and let this bill grow and write people off in the way that's happened for many years. We're going to provide really important employment support 200,000 people among the 2.8 million have said that they would work tomorrow with the right support. We've got a duty to put that support in place. That will be better for them and it will get the bill down for the country.
Pat McFadden, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you.